Welcome, the anointed ones. The greatest threat to darkness is a single light that refuses to be extinguished. Here's a fact. Throughout history, one determined person has often dismantled entire empires of deception, corruption, and chaos. And when that person steps into their power, oh, it's game over. Now imagine this. A whole gang of witches, spellcasters, and manipulators plotting against you, convinced they had you cornered. After all, you're just one person, right? What could you possibly do against their elaborate schemes and dark magic? But here's where it gets interesting. You didn't just survive. You shattered their entire operation without breaking a sweat. One-man army style. And trust me, that's their worst nightmare. Because when intimidation, manipulation, and hexes don't work, the only thing left for them is fear. And oh boy, they're scared to death right now. Grab your seat. This story isn't just about survival, it's about domination against the odds. And spoiler alert, you won. Number 1. Your existence disrupted their ecosystem. They had their system all figured out. A well-oiled machine running on manipulation, fear, and secrecy. It worked perfectly for them because nobody questioned it. Nobody stood up to it. Most people either didn't notice what was happening or were too afraid to get involved. That's exactly how they thrived. Hidden, unchecked, and comfortable in their control. But then you showed up, and without even trying, you threw their entire ecosystem into chaos. It wasn't just that you were different. It was the fact that your presence disrupted everything they relied on. They weren't prepared for someone who couldn't be intimidated, manipulated, or worn down. You didn't fit into their script, and that terrified them. They counted on people playing by their rules, feeding into their power dynamics, but you didn't show up to play their game. You brought your own rules, and they didn't even know how to respond. It wasn't about flashy confrontations or dramatic battles. Sometimes it was just the way you carried yourself, unbothered, unshaken, and completely out of their reach. That alone dismantled their false sense of security. They started slipping up, scrambling to regain control. But it was too late. Their whole foundation had cracked the moment they realized they couldn't control you. See, when you walk into a room and disrupt a system built on control, you don't just annoy the people running it, you terrify them. Because they know it's only a matter of time before others see the cracks and start questioning everything. That's why they were desperate to stop you. You weren't just a problem, you were a threat to their entire existence. Your very presence was an act of defiance, a living reminder that their power wasn't as solid as they thought. And that disruption, it's more powerful than any spell or strategy they could ever conjure. Because once their system is exposed as fragile, it's game over, and they knew it. Number 2, spiritual authority silenced their power. They banked everything on their rituals, spells, and dark energy. They believed that by weaving their incantations, manipulating vibrations, and conjuring chaos, they could control outcomes and bend anyone to their will. For a while that might have worked, but then they ran into you. Here's the thing about spiritual authority. It doesn't need elaborate performances or mystical theatrics to make an impact. It doesn't have to shout, chant, or draw circles on the ground. It just is. That's what they didn't understand. You weren't operating on the same frequency as them, and because of that, their power had no grip on you. They cast spells, whispered curses, and performed whatever rituals they believed would break you. But nothing stuck. Why? Because your connection to a higher source was unshakable. They were out here trying to manipulate forces while you embodied the force itself. Pure, divine, untouchable. And when someone walks in that kind of authority, darkness can't hold its ground. Their desperation grew because they couldn't figure out why nothing was working. They were used to seeing fear in people's eyes, to watching their spells take effect, and seeing people crumble under the weight of their energy. But you didn't flinch. They whispered their curses, and you kept walking. They tried to twist your fate, and it backfired on them. They were so focused on their rituals that they missed the most important truth. True power doesn't come from manipulation. It comes from alignment. You were aligned with a frequency they couldn't touch, couldn't block, and couldn't even understand. And that's the real reason they lost. Their chants became noise, their rituals became meaningless routines, and their power dissolved into thin air because it simply couldn't survive in your presence. In the end, They weren't just defeated. They were silenced by a force they never saw coming, your unshakable authority. And trust me, that's the kind of defeat they'll never recover from. Number 3, your presence became the antidote to their magic. They relied on complexity, rituals, symbols, secret chants, and carefully timed ceremonies. That was their whole game. Everything they did required layers of effort to conjure up some sort of influence over people's minds and situations. It was all smoke and mirrors, designed to look powerful but only effective when the conditions were just right. Then there was you, moving through life without needing any of that. No theatrics, no drawn-out rituals. Your power was simple, raw, and effortless. It was the kind of energy that can't be manufactured or manipulated. And that's what made them panic. They couldn't understand how you could walk in such confidence and authority without needing the same tools they relied on. You became the antidote to their magic simply by existing. They threw everything they had at you, thinking their spells and curses would land, but nothing stuck. Their magic fizzled out the moment it came near you, and that's because your natural energy operated on a higher frequency than their manufactured chaos. Darkness can't thrive in the presence of authentic light, and that's exactly what you carried. It drove them crazy because they couldn't figure it out. They kept digging deeper into their rituals, looking for stronger spells and more potent curses, hoping something would finally break you. But the harder they tried, the more powerless they became. It was like watching someone try to fight the wind, exhausting, futile, and embarrassing. Their whole identity was built around the idea that they were in control, that their magic was supreme. But your presence exposed the truth. Their power was fragile, dependent on illusions and manipulation. You didn't just neutralize their magic, you rendered it irrelevant, and that was the ultimate humiliation for them. You didn't need a grand display or a counterattack to win, you just had to be. And in doing so, you dismantled everything they thought made them powerful. They were defeated by a force they couldn't even begin to understand, the undeniable strength of your natural, unshakable presence. Number 4, they thought intimidation would work. It backfired. They counted on fear as their greatest weapon. It was their tried and true tactic. Corner someone, apply pressure, and watch them crumble. And to be fair, it had worked on countless people before you. They thrived on intimidation because it gave them control without having to lift a finger. Fear made people second-guess themselves, shrink back, and become paralyzed. But when they came for you, they hit an unmovable wall. You refused to flinch. That threw them off balance. They tried turning up the heat, more threats, more manipulation, more mind games. But the more they pushed, the more obvious it became that they were the ones unraveling, not you. See, their entire system relied on your submission. If you didn't cave in, the power they thought they had became useless. They needed your fear to fuel their dominance. Without it, they were powerless. What really broke them was your calm. They didn't understand how you could stand in the middle of their chaos and remain completely unshaken. It wasn't arrogance or bravado. It was a quiet, unyielding strength, and that kind of composure, it's terrifying to those who thrive on control because it shows them that their intimidation tactics are hollow. They became desperate, trying to find new ways to provoke you, but their efforts only exposed their own insecurity. Fear was their comfort zone, their strategy for keeping control. When it didn't work on you, it was like pulling the rug out from under them. In the end, they weren't just defeated, they were humiliated. Because nothing is more demoralizing than realizing your greatest weapon has no effect. They thought they were in control, but your refusal to bow to fear revealed the truth. They were the ones scrambling for power. And the more you stood firm, the more powerless they became. You didn't just survive their attacks, you rendered them irrelevant. Want me to continue the next points in separate elaborations? Number 5, you possessed an innate power they couldn't steal or manipulate. Their entire strategy revolved around one thing: control. Whether through intimidation, manipulation, or energy-draining tactics, they thrived by stealing the strength of others. It wasn't always obvious, sometimes it was subtle. A seed of doubt planted in someone's mind, a heavy atmosphere that drained your joy, or a sudden shift in mood that made people question their own sanity. They knew how to get inside people's heads and feed off their energy. That's how they kept their power. But then there was you, and nothing about you fit their usual playbook. They couldn't break into your mind, twist your emotions, or hijack your energy. Every attempt they made was met with resistance they didn't understand. You didn't just survive their tactics, you rendered them useless. The reason was simple. Your power wasn't something they could touch. It wasn't borrowed, conditional, or dependent on external forces. It came from an unshakable divine source that couldn't be corrupted or manipulated. They couldn't hack into it, drain it, or even comprehend it. That's what made you so dangerous to them. Their entire strategy depended on finding a way in, but with you, there was no entry point. As their frustration grew, they became desperate, throwing everything they had at you. But every attack only made your light shine brighter. They didn't understand that true power doesn't come from dominance, it comes from alignment. And your alignment with that divine force made you untouchable. What really destroyed them was the realization that you didn't even need to fight back. You simply stood firm, rooted in a power they couldn't steal or manipulate. That's what broke their spirits. They had built their entire identity around control, but they were powerless against someone who couldn't be controlled. And that's when they knew they had lost. Not just the battle, but their grip on the illusion they had built for themselves. Number 6. You weren't fighting fire with fire, you transcended the battlefield. They came at you with everything they had, expecting a war fought on their terms. Dark tactics, psychological games, manipulation, these were their weapons. They thrived on chaos and conflict, assuming that anyone who opposed them would retaliate in the same way. That's how they trapped people, by dragging them down to their level, where darkness thrives. But you didn't take the bait. You didn't fight fire with fire because you understood something they never could. The real victory isn't won by playing their game. It's won by transcending the battlefield entirely, and that's exactly what you did. They were prepared for resistance, for you to mirror their aggression or engage in the same mind games. But you operated on a completely different frequency, one they couldn't access or understand. While they were busy setting traps in the dark, you moved in the light, untouched by their schemes. That alone disarmed them because darkness can't overpower what it can't reach. Their frustration became palpable. They kept throwing attacks your way, expecting you to crack or retaliate. But their efforts bounced off you like dull arrows. The more they fought, the more powerless they became. They were left swinging at shadows while you walked right past them. What really broke them was the realization that their weapons were obsolete against you. They thrived on control, but you weren't bound by their rules. By refusing to engage on their terms, you rendered their entire strategy irrelevant. They couldn't comprehend it, and that confusion was their undoing. True victory isn't about winning a battle on someone else's terms. It's about rising above the need for the battle altogether. That's what you did. And in doing so, you forced them to face the truth they had spent their entire existence avoiding. Their power was only ever an illusion. Number 7. Your victory was psychological warfare. They didn't anticipate. They knew how to play with people's minds. That was their expertise. They thrived on planting seeds of doubt, creating confusion and twisting perceptions until their targets were paralyzed by uncertainty. They didn't always need brute force. Psychological warfare was their most effective weapon, and for a long time it worked. But then they met you, and nothing went according to plan. You didn't react the way they expected. Where others would panic or crumble under their mental attacks, you remained unshaken. And that single act of defiance was far more devastating than any physical counterattack could have been. See, their entire strategy depended on one thing: getting inside your head. If they could control your thoughts, they could control you. But when you refused to give them that power, their carefully crafted tactics fell apart. They became desperate, throwing more complex games your way, but it only made their failure more obvious. What they didn't anticipate was that the real battlefield was never external. It was in the mind, and by staying rooted in clarity and peace, you won that war before it even began. That broke them in ways they weren't prepared for. Their confidence crumbled because they realized they had no control over you, and when their confidence shattered, their power went with it. Psychological warfare is a double-edged sword. When it backfires, it cuts deep into those who wield it. That's exactly what happened to them. They became paralyzed by the very doubt they had tried to instill in you. Their own minds turned against them because they were never prepared to face someone who couldn't be manipulated. Your victory wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, psychological, and devastating. They lost not because you fought harder, but because you didn't need to fight at all. You stood firm, and their entire world crumbled around them. That's a defeat they'll never recover from. Number 8. The power of solitude made you unpredictable. They were used to fighting groups, alliances, and teams, setups where manipulation was easy. Divide and conquer, create distrust, find a weak link and exploit it. That's how they maintained control. But when it came to you, they were completely stumped. You operated alone, and that made you dangerous in ways they couldn't handle. See, solitude is unpredictable. It makes you self-reliant and impossible to compromise. There was no one for them to manipulate, betray, or turn against you. They couldn't plant seeds of doubt in your circle because there was no circle. They had no leverage, no foothold, and that was terrifying for them. They underestimated how powerful solitude could be. While they thrived on chaos and confusion, you thrived on clarity. You weren't tangled in gossip, distractions, or petty politics. You moved with precision and purpose, always one step ahead. They tried to anticipate your next move, but it was like chasing shadows. You answered to no one but yourself, which made their usual strategies completely useless. Their frustration grew because they were used to controlling environments, not individuals. They didn't know how to fight someone who didn't play by their rules. Every attack they launched fizzled because there was no one to amplify their chaos. And the more isolated they made you, thinking it would break you, the stronger you became. Solitude didn't weaken you. It sharpened your instincts and strengthened your resolve. You didn't have the distractions that made other people vulnerable. They were playing chess, trying to predict your next move, but you weren't even on the same board. That's what ultimately made you unstoppable. They had built their entire strategy around control, but they couldn't control someone who thrived on independence. Your solitude wasn't a weakness, it was your greatest weapon. And by the time they realized it, it was already too late. Let me know when you're ready for the next elaboration. Number 9. They underestimated the strength of purpose over numbers. They always relied on numbers to maintain their power. The strength of a collective, multiple voices chanting in unison, numerous hands pulling strings behind the scenes, was their safety net. They believed that numbers created an impenetrable wall of influence, that sheer volume was unbeatable. Their entire strategy was rooted in chaotic collective efforts, where confusion became their ally. But what they failed to understand was that purpose is far stronger than numbers. Their chaos lacked direction, while your singular focus was driven by divine purpose. You weren't moved by noise or outnumbered by their tactics because your path was clear and guided by something they couldn't comprehend. That clarity made you unstoppable. They underestimated how potent that kind of purpose is. While they scrambled, divided among countless schemes and hidden agendas, you moved with precision. Their collective force, once intimidating, began to unravel because it lacked a unifying purpose. Chaos eventually collapses under its own weight when faced with someone moving in unwavering alignment. What made it even worse for them was the fact that you didn't need a crowd behind you to be effective. You stood alone, yet your strength eclipsed their numbers. And that was their downfall. They had always equated power with size, never realizing that true power comes from alignment and intention. In the end, they were defeated, not because you fought harder or called in reinforcements, but because your focus shattered their disorder. They saw it too late. That a single person with divine purpose is more powerful than an army without direction. And once they realized they couldn't break that focus, their entire system collapsed under its own weight. Number 10. You turned exposure into their biggest weakness. They operated in the shadows, where secrecy was their greatest weapon. That's where their power thrived, hidden from scrutiny, immune to judgment. In darkness, they could manipulate, deceive, and control without anyone holding them accountable. It gave them a sense of invincibility, as long as no one shone a light on their deeds. But that's exactly what you did. Your victory wasn't just about defeating them. It was about bringing their actions into the open. And that was a blow they never saw coming. Exposure turned out to be their greatest weakness. What they once wielded as power became their undoing the moment it was dragged into the light. You didn't need to shout accusations or mount a public campaign. Your presence alone was enough to unravel their carefully constructed image. People started seeing through their facade, questioning the lies they had been fed. The truth was no longer hidden in shadows. It was right there in plain view. And nothing terrifies manipulators more than transparency. Their humiliation wasn't just personal, it was public. The masks they had worn for so long began to crumble, and their carefully guarded secrets spilled out for everyone to see. People who had once feared them now saw them for what they truly were, weak, desperate, and powerless without the veil of secrecy. What made it even worse for them was that they couldn't contain the exposure. Once the light was shone, there was no going back. Their loss wasn't just defeat, it was a collapse of their entire identity. They had thrived in secrecy, but now they were defined by their failure, and everyone knew it. That kind of exposure isn't just embarrassing, it's fatal to those who built their lives on deception. And by forcing them into the light, you ensured that they would never regain the power they once had. Number 11. Your resilience destroyed their narrative of control. Their entire existence was built on the belief that they were in control. They operated under the illusion that everyone bows to their will eventually, that with enough pressure, intimidation, or manipulation they could break anyone. And for a long time that illusion held strong. People feared them because they seemed unstoppable. But then there was you, and you shattered that myth without even trying. They threw everything at you. Lies, threats, and relentless attacks designed to wear you down. But instead of breaking, you stood firm. Your resilience was a direct challenge to their narrative. It forced them to confront a truth they had spent their entire existence denying. Their power had limits. That realization was devastating for them. They had always believed that control was absolute, that they were untouchable. But your refusal to be dominated exposed a fundamental flaw in their strategy. If one person could resist them, then others could too. And once that seed of doubt was planted, it spread like wildfire. Their confidence crumbled because they had built their identity on being invincible. They weren't just losing control over you, they were losing control over the illusion they had created for themselves. And without that illusion, their entire structure began to collapse. Your resilience wasn't just about survival. It was about dismantling their grip on reality. You forced them to see that control was never as solid as they thought, and that shattered their confidence in a way they couldn't recover from. In the end, you didn't just win the battle, you destroyed the foundation of their power. They had thrived on control, but you showed them that true power belongs to those who cannot be controlled. And that was a defeat far worse than anything they had ever imagined. Number 12. They were frightened by the mirror you held up. They thought they controlled the game. They believed their power, their influence, and their tactics would make you bend to their will, because that's how it had always been. They had made others afraid, manipulated, and defeated with ease. But when they encountered you, something unexpected happened. By standing firm in your resolve, by holding your ground when they thought they could shatter you, you held up a mirror to them, and they didn't like what they saw. They saw their own frailty reflected back at them. Their perceived power wasn't as invincible as they thought. It was fragile, easily shaken by someone who refused to bend. Your unwavering stand, your resilience, was a clear reminder of how dependent they were on fear, chaos, and manipulation to maintain control. In other words, they were built on a foundation of weakness, and that became glaringly obvious the moment you refused to give in. They were frightened because they had based their existence on the belief that power comes from dominating others. But when they saw your strength, your integrity, and your clarity, it exposed a painful truth. They weren't in control at all. You weren't the one they needed to break. They were the ones who were already broken, masked by the illusion of power. Their greatest fear wasn't that you'd defeat them in battle, it was that they'd be exposed for what they truly were: weak, hollow, unsteady, and when they saw that mirror of truth, they recoiled. They couldn't face the reality that the Emperor had no clothes. Your stand didn't just strip away their control, it exposed their vulnerability. The mere reflection of your strength made their power look pathetic by comparison, and that was the moment they truly lost. Number 13. Their attempts to isolate you only strengthened your resolve. When they tried to isolate you, they thought they were weakening you. They believed that by cutting you off from others, by pushing you into solitude, they could break your spirit. Isolation was meant to be their weapon, their way of draining you, making you feel small, alone, and powerless. They thought they could break you by depriving you of connection, but what they didn't realize was that isolation only fueled your growth. You didn't fall apart in solitude, you thrived in it. Each attempt they made to make you feel lonely or vulnerable only made your resolve stronger. While they expected you to wither, you became sharper, more focused, and more aligned with your purpose. You discovered that solitude wasn't a curse, it was a sanctuary for your mind, a place where your spirit could be refined and fortified. The more they attacked, the more they sought to diminish you, the more you grew. Each blow became an opportunity to get clearer on who you were and what you stood for. In isolation, you found clarity. You found strength in places they couldn't even imagine. Every challenge they threw at you was like a blacksmith hammering iron into shape, and you came out stronger, tougher, and more unyielding with every strike. What they didn't understand was that while they tried to isolate you physically, they couldn't isolate your mind. They couldn't reach the divine source that fueled you. That source, unshaken and untouchable, made your resolve impenetrable. It didn't matter how alone you were, because your purpose was never about relying on others. By the time they realized their mistake, you had become unstoppable. The more they pushed you away, the more powerful you became. Isolation didn't break you. It created a version of you they couldn't defeat. And that's why, when they tried to isolate you, it was their biggest mistake, because it turned you into a force that nothing could touch. Number 14. You became the living testimony of their failure. When the dust settled and the battle was over, the greatest victory wasn't in your triumph over them, it was in what your victory represented. You didn't just defeat them in a single moment. Your victory became a permanent mark of their failure. They had spent so much time trying to control, manipulate, and subdue you, only to watch you stand unbroken, stronger than ever. And that fact, more than anything, became their legacy of incapability. Your success wasn't a fleeting moment. It became the ongoing reminder of their irrelevance. Every time they looked at you, every time they saw your unwavering strength, they were forced to confront the truth. They were nothing without manipulation. You had exposed their fragility, their reliance on fear, and their lack of true power. And that truth would haunt them forever. You weren't just a victor. You were a living testament to their failure. Your victory wasn't just a personal win. It was the permanent destruction of their narrative. They had tried to control, to dominate, and to break you. And in the end, it was you who stood unyielding while they crumbled beneath their own weight. What was worse for them was that you didn't need to rub their failure in their faces. Your very existence was the proof of their impotence. You didn't need to boast, to gloat, or to force them to acknowledge their defeat. Your triumph spoke for itself. Every moment of your continued strength, every time you moved forward, was a slap in the face of their hollow power. They thought they were in control, that they could bend you to their will. But your success was their living failure. They became the cautionary tale, the proof that even the most cunning and powerful can fall when they face someone who cannot be broken. And that is the ultimate defeat. Knowing that your legacy is nothing but a testament to your own inability to control what you once believed was yours to dominate. In the end, your victory wasn't just about defeating a group or gang of witches. It was about exposing the fragility of their control, shattering the illusions they had built their entire existence upon. You didn't simply survive their attacks, you transcended them. While they relied on chaos, manipulation, and fear, you stood grounded in an unshakable purpose, a force they could never steal or manipulate. Their attempts to weaken you only forged you into something stronger, something more resilient. You didn't fight on their terms, and because of that, they couldn't comprehend your power. Every tactic they used to isolate, intimidate, or confuse you only backfired, turning their strategies into a glaring reflection of their own impotence. You became the living proof that their power was always an illusion, one that crumbled the moment they faced someone who couldn't be controlled. What they never understood was that true strength doesn't come from numbers, manipulation, or secrecy. It comes from a deep, unwavering connection to purpose, clarity, and the ability to stand unshaken when everything around you is crumbling. You didn't just defeat them in the moment, you ensured that their failure would echo forever, a permanent testament to their own lack of true power. In the end, your triumph wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to yourself just how powerful you are when you refuse to let anyone or anything dictate your worth. They believed they were the ones in control, but you showed them that the real power lies in owning your truth, standing firm in your purpose, and walking your path with unshakable resolve. Their defeat wasn't just your victory. It was the unraveling of everything they thought they were, a loud reminder that true power cannot be stolen or manipulated, and it cannot be broken by the hands of those who seek to control. The world will remember your victory as the moment they learned that even the mightiest fall when they meet someone who knows their worth. And that is a lesson they will never forget. If you found this story as captivating and empowering as I did, don't let this moment slip away. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on more incredible content that challenges the norm and exposes the hidden truths. Hit that like button to show your support and help spread this message far and wide. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below and share your own experiences, or let me know what you think about the journey we just explored. Your voice matters, and your engagement helps create a community of like-minded individuals who refuse to be controlled. Lastly, don't forget to share this with friends, family, or anyone who needs to hear this message of resilience, strength, and unshakable purpose. Together, let's spread this truth and create waves of empowerment. Stay strong, stay focused, and keep fighting your battles. The world needs your light. God bless you.